people in general, the public, had discovered gold and silver, and their percentage appreciation might not be as great as something else we could find. We looked around and we hit upon this field that nobody had ever invested in before. And we pioneered investing in these 31 metals that the book, Get Really Rich in the Super Metals Boom.
Some of them would be what?
Yes, a good question. They're very exotic names that you haven't heard much outside of science books. Antimony, cobalt, zirconium, A to Z, antimony to zirconium, and then manganese, without which you can't make steel, chromium, without which you can't make stainless steel, germanium, no night sighting devices, no fiber optics of any description, columbium, a vital element in hardening of steel, cobalt, which is another key factor in giant magnets, in jet aircraft, titanium, 4 times as light and 4 times as strong as steel. The Russians are right now making submarines, deep-running attack submarines, the hulls of which are all titanium. Because they have so much titanium in Russia and are able to build these, some of the more modern Russian ships, Russian submarines, can sink to greater depths and withstand far greater pressures than ours. Those are some of the metals, but tellurium, vanadium, tantalum, we could go on at length.
Well, strategic metals, that means they are very useful in defense purposes?
Yes, it does that, Walter, and both defense and industrial. They must occupy 2 ingredients to be called strategic. Now, both defense and industrial metals, and all of these metals that we're talking about in the book are important for both of them. Gold and silver are both strategic and precious metals. They're far more precious metals. They have much less industrial usage than does say, chromium or manganese.
Now, all of these rather exotic metals that you've just mentioned, they're not all in our backyard, are they?
No, indeed, they're not. Many of them come from questionable and unstable sources of supply, as witness chromium from the former Rhodesia, Zimbabwe now, and manganese, which is almost totally a monopoly of Russia and South Africa, cobalt from Zaire, where Zaire and Zambia are dominant in that field, and we almost lost our vital supply of cobalt in 1978 when a Russian-inspired invasion of Zaire took place by the Katangese irregulars. Cobalt went from $6 to $50 a pound. Therein lies quite a tale, just to show you how some people can capitalize on this, not to the extent perhaps that the Russians are able to. The Russians, having made up their mind to instigate a strike at Zambia and the cobalt mines of Zambia with their dogs of war, the Katangese irregulars, proceeded to buy up, before they ever started this, all of the free world supplies of cobalt. And then they struck these cobalt mines in Zaire. That had the effect of closing down the supply of physical cobalt. We in the United States were the #1 users. And who had the supply when we got ready to go after cobalt? The Russians had it. So we had to go to them and buy the cobalt from the Russians at a terribly exorbitant price.
Well, investing possibilities aside, the fact that so many of these strategic metals are located and are mined in such unstable countries really puts this country in kind of a box, doesn't it?
Yes. Now, we're in better shape than we were even when I wrote the book, Walter. Things do change even by the month in this new field. And not that strategic metals are new, but the business of investing in them is quite new. And as far as our defense stockpiles, things change quickly. In 1950, the Defense Production Act provided that we have a 3-year stockpile of all these metals. It's never been followed at all down through the years. Now, Mr. Reagan has started to give more than lip service to that, and he's made provisions for buying. First he bought 1,200,000 pounds of cobalt. Now he's buying over 5 million more pounds of cobalt. That took care of the most critical deficiency we have, and he's let it be known that he is going to bring all of these stockpiles up to what our Act of 1950 called for, a 3-year supply. In the meantime, Walter, I'd like to say that although we certainly don't want to be cut off from these supplies, It would also be a mistake for one to assume that the Russians are in Roanoke right now. They're not. That is a way of saying that the situation is not one we should panic over. We still have around a 40% supply of most of these metals. The only one we're a little bit deficient in is the platinum group, and that is not all that vital to defense, the platinum group metals, which are platinum, palladium, osmium, ruthenium, iridium, and rhodium. But we're not all that dependent on that. Getting away from the platinum group, we have enough for a year or a year and a half in most metals. No one would know how long a future emergency is going to last, but in view of the terrible nature of today's weaponry, one would doubt that a further war would last much longer than that. So I don't want people to think that we are in a state of panic or crisis for these metals. That's not true.
Well, what does the instability of the supply of these metals do to the investment potential?
That just makes the investment potential greater because, of course, there is the danger that as a coup may take place in a Zaire or a Zambia or in one of the lesser stable nations, Brazil, which provides practically all of our usable columbium, known as niobium elsewhere. If a coup took place in Brazil, we'd be in tough shape there. But many of the African nations, which are highly unstable, are responsible for a good part of our supply of critical metals. Therefore, if they were cut off, the prices could go up. So this instability acts in favor of the investor. It is not a good thing for industry and for the defense part of this business.
Well, we're talking about investing in these strategic metals. You know, just about anybody can invest in the stock market or real estate or whatever. Are strategic metals open to just about anybody?
A fine question, Walter. Yes, they are, but I want to give a few words of caution that have largely things that have happened since this book was written and since it has been on the market. Number one, there's absolutely no hurry to get into strategic metals right now. As long as U.S. interest rates are as high as they are right now, all commodity markets are going to be relatively depressed, and that includes metals. So you've got plenty of time to get into these strategic metals. In fact, I think the prices may go slightly lower than they are now before they go higher. So don't think you have to rush in today. Now, one of the things you should watch, because it's getting at a very low ebb now, a couple of the base metals, copper and lead, are excellent investments, and zinc likewise. Of these strategic metals, however, that we're talking about, the 31, and get really rich in the coming super metals boom, of those, I don't think a single one is right at its low right now. The reason that reading the book is important is because very shortly now there are going to be some mutual funds out where the person who has only $100 can buy shares.
Well, that's another angle that I wanted to pursue, and we'll get into that in just a moment.
What game show asks this question?
Hey, what have I been bitten by? Let's see. I'd like to tell you about.
It's Family Feud, the half hour of fun where families match wits for big prizes. Host Richard Dawson referees the fun Monday through Friday at 6:30.
Be sure and